Welcome to chapter 3. This chapter is all about feeding the world and how you and I are going to be solutions to feeding the world in 2050. So we're going to look at 5 really big things when you talk about the human population and how we're going to feed this world in less than 35 years. We're going to look at human populations. We're going to look at environmental limitations like water, like soil. We're going to look at the increasing food supply and global food production, and then we're going to wrap all that together and figure out a solution for both of them. So, some key concepts that I really want you to know. First of all, the human population is never going to stop growing. We have, in the 21st century, figured out how to live longer. We have figured out technology. We know that there are a lot of different ways that we can feed this world and we can populate this world. So, meeting both of those together is very, very important. And then we're going to look at how the food supply, it has to continue to grow, but how we're going to do that efficiently. We're also going to look at the soil, water, and energy resources that we have in agriculture and how that's going to maintain until 2050 and then hopefully grow until 2050. And then, unfortunately, I'm going to have to talk to you a little bit about how we don't have enough food for everyone in the world. Or we do, but it's just not distributed correctly. And then wrapping all that together, how we're going to sustain agriculture in 2050 and beyond, and how we're going to do that with agriculture production systems that can be implemented. Some are implemented today, some are a little bit too expensive to do today, but are definitely in the works. Chart. On the left side, you can see the billions of people, okay, and then on the bottom is the year. So you can look back at 1750 and you could see we were a little less than 1 billion people in the world, okay. Fast forward until 2000 and we start to really climb. There's not a peak yet. So we're projecting, or scientists are projecting, sociology people are projecting that we're going to have at least 9 to 10 billion people on this earth by 2050, and some believe that that's not going to stop there. So if you look on the right side of that, you can see the less developed countries are going to be more populated than the more developed countries, and we'll talk about the difference there in a minute. But you can definitely see the difference in how populations will grow, and that's going to definitely affect the way we grow food. That's going to affect the way we harvest food. That's going to affect the way we price food. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to figure out all of these different ways or different problems, but then we have to figure out a solution to that. So, populations have definitely increased because of different technology advances that we've had, not just in agriculture, not just GPSs, but we have increased because we know how to live longer. There are drugs that we take to live longer. We figured out that if you don't want to die of heart disease, you have to take care of your heart. You have to take care of your body. And so when our great-grandparents or maybe even our grandparents were living until their, late 60s, early 70s, we're living into our 80s and 90s. And so not only have we figured out how to use technology in agriculture, but we've figured out how to use technology in just about every aspect of our lives. Important. I want to make sure that you all understand and know what the difference is between here. So developed, ED, okay, the end is EDs, developed countries. So these people have high per capita income. So they're making money. They are bringing home a paycheck every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it is, they are making money. They also have a high human development index, okay? So if you want to have 3 kids, you can have 3 kids. So those development indexes give you the freedom to do that and take care of those kids or take care of your family pretty comfortably. And so just a couple of countries that we see as developed are obviously us, United States, we are developed. Canada, Australia, Taiwan is actually developed. Israel is developed. A lot of Western Europe, Australia, those places are developed. Okay, so developed is high per capita income. They're bringing home a paycheck. They're able to pay bills. They're able to live in a house that is, has running water, has air, has TVs, has the Roku or whatever, what have you. They are able to live pretty comfortably. So developing countries have a low per capita income, so they're making anywhere from $1 to $2, some even less than that, a day, or maybe even a week, or unfortunately a month. They have a low human development index, so not living as long or living as well. And those countries would be like Central or South Africa, a lot of Asia countries. There's Africa. Some countries in Africa are not developed, and then obviously India. And we'll talk a little bit about India and why they are not developed, but kind of on that verge of being developed in class. This just kind of gives you a visual figure of how extremely blessed and lucky we are, in my opinion, because if you look at this, that dark green color, those are all of the developed countries. So that high capita income are able to live longer. We live pretty comfortably. We have a steady income. We have a steady economy. Someone probably argue with me on that, but that's okay, because it's our own opinion and we need to value each other's opinion. But if you look at the developing countries, you can see that a lot of this world is still developing. So for example, if you look at Russia, that country is still considered developing. Why? Because there's a lot of people in Russia, and a lot of those people are not living comfortably. They're not able to bring home a steady paycheck. They have a kind of a low per capita income and a low human index simply because there's so many people in Russia. Now, in agriculture terms, Russia is vital, very, very important to U.S. agriculture and what we bring in. So, and what we sell, so our imports and our exports, which we'll talk about in class as well. So you can see us, you can see Canada, you can see a lot of the, European countries. You can also see Australia in there, New Zealand, Taiwan. Those are all developed countries. Here, but one of the most important ones that I want you to really understand and value are how much crops we can produce and how the yields have increased. So, for example, if you were to take this year's wheat yield, so the bushels per acre, astonishing. I mean, nobody would ever have thought, with the weather that we've had, that somebody could grow 65, 70 bushels of acres of 65 or 70 bushels of wheat per acre. But it happened, which is awesome. Back in, let's even go the 1970s, 30 bushels per acre was huge. So we've definitely come a long way, but that is one of the biggest aspects and one of the hugest ways we are feeding the world is our yields and how they've increased throughout these last 30 to 50 years. So should be pretty adequate to, food available for the world's population. If we're growing that much wheat, we should be able to feed the world's population. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I mean, we have an abundance of food, but is it adequately being distributed? And that is not so. It's not. It's not evenly distributed. So the wheat that we're growing or the corn that we're growing, the livestock that we're growing is not readily available to people in African countries, for example. And if it would be, it would be too expensive for their income to allow. And one just astounding figure to me is, or stat, if you will, would be 16% of the world's population faces insecurity, food insecurity. So if you were to take Right now we have right now we have about 7 billion people in the world. 16% of that is now facing food insecurity. So they have no idea where their next their next meal will come from. And unfortunately, they might not even know where the next week's food will come from. So global food production, huge, but very, very unevenly distributed. The food prices and undernourishment. So you can see food prices, that blue that blue line there, and if you look at in the about 1976, when the oil crisis happened, that food price obviously started to go down. I mean, there were a little peaks there. There were some peaks there, but definitely started to go down. If you were to look at the food production per capita income, the total food production obviously was going to keep rising because we started to learn how to grow food more efficiently in the 1980s, 1990s. 1970s is when fertilizer, pesticides, all that became a big deal. 1990s was when this big thing called Roundup came up, so we were able to grow more food. And then if you look at that top line there, the undernourishment in developing countries, we saw a little bit of a decline there in early 90s or early 90s to 1995, and then it started to go back up a little bit. Now, a lot of people would think, that's got a lot to do with the economy. That's got a lot to do with different aspects of that country or those undernourished developing countries. But is it? Could we have gotten food to them? That's something that our parents and that generation is who we need to ask for that. So undernourished in millions per person. That's definitely still climbing today, even so. Are the economic and the social factors that come along with developed and developing countries, and how we're going to solve this problem of feeding the world in 2050. The big one is poverty greatly limits the food that can be purchased. So if a family in a developing country wants to purchase, let's say, organic food, can they? Is it going to be more expensive? Some would argue yes, some would argue no. But when you're looking at that worker or that laborer's per day income, if it's $1 to $2, they're not going to be able to afford much. I mean, they're going to have to live on rice and beans, as we say, because that is something that's going to fill your stomach. It has some sort of nutritional content. It's going to be able to push you through until you can get some sort of good protein, but that's kind of where it is in terms of economic and social factors. And then obviously we're going to have lower levels of food production and then distribution throughout the world. So, if I'm growing grass-fed beef at Ogeechee Ranch, I want to sell to a country in Africa. They're not going to pay what it's going to what I'm going to charge to make $1 or to make $2 at that. They're going to get what they have readily available to them to feed their family. I mean, the whole purpose is to make sure that they have food in their stomach. And then because of that, because of the age of time that we're living in, a lot of these people are unfortunately displaced from their farms, from their homes, because of different economic situations or wars. Wars are still happening, and we in the United States, we see it and we know it, but there's a lot of different, political aspects to that. So because these people are being displaced, they're not able to grow their own food. So, and also food is unfortunately a method of control of the people by different governments. And so if you're not in a democracy that gives you freedom, that is something that is pretty hurtful to people that are displaced by wars and by different economic statures as well. Here, I want you to look at developing regions. So about 19.4% of the total population of developing regions are living on less than $1 a day. Now I want you to look at sub-Saharan Africa, 44%. Almost half of the people in sub-Saharan Africa are living on $1 per day or less. That's astonishing. That makes you value that $3 water that you bought at Sodexo this morning. I mean, that's astonishing, and that really puts into perspective how incredibly blessed we are to live in the United States that we do. Okay, so here are some environmental limitations that to me are very, very important in terms of how we look at the limit of food production that we have in the United States. The first one, I'm going to harp on it. You know, I love soil. You know, I love teaching about soil. You know, I love growing things in soil, but soil resources are the number one factor, in my opinion, of why it's pretty hard for us to grow things in different areas. So again, sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at that, pretty hard to grow things in there because they have a very, very sandy climate and there's not a lot of clay material there that will hold water. Water is also a number, probably some would argue with me, number one and number two there. To me, it's probably number two because if you don't have the right soil, it's not going to hold the water even if you had it. So water is a pretty big scarce of many different countries, and then energy. So are these people able to generate energy to grow these foods and to grow the different food selection that is needed in that area?